He likes the challenge, likes to remind everybody he's still the king. But I think the table's been set well because these guys aren't afraid, right? And I think it's something about the generation who's grown up playing these guys online. Like when the internet didn't exist, the first time you play these guys in person, you like freaked out. Right now, you're so used to it. They've had blitz battles and bullet battles, and you've seen them streaming. It kind of maybe works against them, right? Because they're not intimidated. They're not scared.
Yeah, often you need to kind of be of a different generation in order to not have that fear factor. And okay, we're off. It's a Queen's Pawn opening. Magnus setting up. Will we see a Grunfeld, a King's Indian defense? It's normal openings though. No A6. Simon was right.
I would love to see the King's Indian. Okay. What are the chances, Si?
I vote Grunfeld. Good.
Oh!
King's Indian it is.
It's the King's Indian.
That's brilliant. I mean, I love it when Magnus plays the King's Indian defense. He does it occasionally. And this is quite an interesting way of playing the position, a very aggressive way, because that queen will obviously and often swing to the other side of the board and go for an attack against White's king. But a bit irregular there, that plan and that move, David.
Yeah, a very rare move order here. We see already Abdusattorov, who's actually one of the best prepared players in the world, even at this tender age. He did pause for around 30 seconds there, and he eventually blocks this check with his knight. So Black has options now. Due to the fact that this white knight is pinned, you can jump into the center. There we go. Magnus asking questions. It's only move 6. But there is a strategic threat on the board to capture this white knight on c3, Abdusattorov. How's he going to react to this? I must admit, I'm not familiar with this exact position.
I was going to say, I mean, we're kind of on our own, and I think Nodirbek might be on his own too.
There's quite a lot of tactics here as well. I mean, White could just move the queen to c2 here, and then, you know, the bishop could line up and another knight could move. It could get incredibly complex here already. And I was thinking now maybe the knight can move to attack that bishop, but I don't know if that works. I'd have to calculate this very carefully if I was going to play it. And as White, I don't really want to double my pawns. So I want to have an answer for knight takes knight. I want to... So, yeah, it's getting a bit complex at an early stage.
Yeah, this is the idea. You mean so that you don't have to double your pawns on c3, I guess, Simon?
Yeah, that's...
Here you can play bishop to d2 and recapture next move.
Yeah, and just try to say I've got a bit of a space advantage, but of course I say that, and he's gone and doubled his pawns immediately. You know, which with the queen on b3 makes more sense because you've got the open file to try and tie down Black's bishops here.
It's funny because it's sort of a Nimzo Indian structure, but Black hasn't had to part ways with the bishop here in order to get it, right? And I wonder, David, how you would attack this structure. Again, don't play this opening or these positions. You said you're on your own too, because to me, Black could consider playing c5 at some point, right? As slow as it is, just to fix those doubled pawns, and then try to remaneuver the queen side where you do things like a Nimzo, where you play eventually, you know, the knight to c6 to a5 and b6 and bishop a6. And it's a slow game, but you say those are doubled isolated pawns that aren't going anywhere. And I wonder what type of plan Magnus will employ now that he has a target like that.
Yeah, exactly. E4, Nodirbek taking space here. I think we might well see your plan, Danny. It just makes a lot of sense, not just to kind of create a nice square for the knight on c6, but also to lengthen the diagonal of this bishop on g7. Essentially, you have to decide at some point to block with either c5 or e5. You cannot allow White to just continue stepping forward. But yeah, big strategic decision taken by Nodirbek here. I would be terrified having weak pawns like this against someone like Magnus, who's known for kind of capitalizing on these small, kind of minimal advantages. But yeah, he's fighting dynamically here, not scared at all.
Especially if we keep the comparison to the Nimzo going, White has this big pawn center, again, similar to some attacking variations of the Nimzo, but normally Black doesn't have a fianchetto king side, right, which makes this position harder to attack for Nodirbek. So again, I'm liking the dynamic. I anticipate Magnus to maybe retreat the queen before he plays c5, but we'll see, because you want that a5 square available, right, if you do play c5. So a lot of dynamics, but a very original position that we have here, and I think that favors the now I have to say former world champion.
Yeah, no, agreed. But you know, I'm also liking the centre. You know, I love having space. I love having big pawns in the middle of the board, which have potential, and White has those pawns. You know, White's got 3 pawns that can generate an attack at some point. If White moves the knight away, he can get another pawn going as well. That'd be something I'd be looking to do here. Maybe just get the f pawn going, Freddy, and just lunge that up the board. So I mean, if I was going to pick a side, I'd rather be White. Maybe it's personal choice. even though I've got the double pawns, I've got more chances to get active play. And I think Nodirbek loves attacking, loves active play. So not all bad. Just a very interesting position, I think, right?
Very interesting position, especially because I think Magnus had the anti-young player approach in the opening, going into unfamiliar territory, just getting him out of book. And it could be because of the amazing, impressive prep that Nodirbek showed on day 2 as well. When we talk about Magnus often, I think the popular opinion is he's the best of all time, one of the best of all time. And for some, he's just GOAT. And then it's like, where do you strike? How do you beat him? What are his weaknesses? And he just seems to do everything better than every player. And while the other established elite players of the world, they do struggle to score wins against him, we often see this younger generation, right? Prague, for example, winning against Magnus from time to time. Nodirbek, Tata Steel, David mentioned, World Rapid. We've seen these performances by them. How are they managing to do that? What kind of play is required to actually make that a reality?
Yeah, and I would even say Artemiev the year before at Tata Steel, that was a big one too. It's a great question, Tanya. I think that partly David touched on the fact that there is a psychological edge Magnus tends to have against his generation. And sometimes that we see that historically whenever a torch is passed, it takes the next generation to grow up and be like, no big deal, right? I got this guy. Just because, whatever, ignorance is bliss, if you will. But I also think there's something to the specific X's and O's that every next generation grows up in a different period. These guys grew up, the other guys grew up getting to know Magnus in real time. These guys grew up studying his games. They also understand a little more of his style. They also have been preparing with computers in a different way, where we're talking about the renaissance that has been injected into the game with AlphaZero and the Leela neural nets, where they just play more creative chess. So I think it's a number of factors, but I would argue that the psychological one is probably one of the biggest, that they're just not scared of him.
Yeah, they don't back down from calculation battles. That's something that a lot of people were scared of against Magnus back in the day. That's why he used to get a lot of endgames, because they were happily taking things down more simple paths. Now the young players realize they can't back down. They just have to kind of fight fire with fire. And okay, Bishop F4 from Abdusattorov. Yeah, I think it's just a good strategy, just not backing down. And we can see that with his decisions in this game, taking the structural weaknesses, taking the center, taking up the challenge. Simon.
Yeah, I think there's that foolhardy thing of youth as well. I think when you're young, you just don't fear anything. You're like invincible, right? And it's like Magnus. It's like, well, I don't care who he is. You know, I can beat him. And it reminds me, I was playing a young Gwaine Jones. I was a grandmaster. He wasn't even an international master. And I remember he was exactly the same. And I think a lot of strongest players, they just don't have the respect. You know, it's actually, they say you should have respect for your opponents, you should have respect, but actually it's kind of the opposite. You shouldn't have that respect. Hikaru, another player, when he was doing all his great things, he didn't really have that, you know, I'm in awe of my opponent kind of thing. He just wanted to beat them. And I think it's actually, just being fearless and having no respect is actually the thing to try and
on the chessboard. It's good to have respect for people
on the chessboard.
Off the chessboard.
In general, yes, only on the chessboard.
Yeah, I think. By the way, I gave the nod that maybe Magnus gave Fabi the draw yesterday out of respect, but I just saw a comment in chat that Magnus actually purposely ended the game as quickly as he could so he could play and then win the late Title Tuesday yesterday. For those of you who didn't see it, he went and played Title Tuesday after and then won. And anyway, sorry, that was totally distraction, but just giving chat a shout out that was a great comment.
No such thing as too much chess for these guys. Right. He takes down Fabi and then goes on to crush Title Tuesday. And just going forward on what you just mentioned, Simon, perhaps for a lot of his own generation and his own colleagues, for Magnus kind of lives rent-free in their heads. But for these guys, they don't let Magnus get into their head. And that's something that's really important when you're playing against world number one. Otherwise, you just psychologically lose the battle before the game even starts.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you can't be afraid of them in any shape or form if you want to beat them, right? I mean, you just got to show no fear. And I mean, David, out of us, you've probably played these guys more. What have you found is your approach when you've played Magnus, you've played a lot of these great players more than us lot here?
Yeah, I mean, being from the same generation, I'm certainly part of the ones who we have this fear factor. Magnus is like the guy that's just unbeatable. But I've also played against some of the younger ones, and I remember analysing with players like Prague, and it's just the confidence. Afterwards, he was saying, oh, I had this and this, I was always winning, I was dominating, I was better. I was like, are you sure? Were we playing the same game? And of course, we checked with the computer and it said I was never in trouble. And I think that actually that kind of helps them, this optimism. It's like we were saying with youth. And I was also at training camps where Magnus was there and Prague and some other young players. And like Danny was saying, they show them respect. They show Magnus respect off the board. They attended his lectures and things. But they played some blitz and there was some trash talking. They do not fear him at all.
Oh, hang on a minute. So who's got the biggest trash talk game out there? Are you going to let us in? I mean, it's not a bad thing to say.
Let's just say the young Indian prodigies. They're
wow.
they've got the talk. They walk the walk, but they can also talk the talk.
I'm surprised to hear that, actually.
Yeah.
You look at them, they just seem like the nicest, most modest chess players. Prag, Gukesh, Arjun, I just can't imagine them doing the trash talk.
I can't see it either.
They grew up consuming content and they grew up watching Magnus in viral videos like Too Weak, Too Slow, right? So back to the point where like, they say the hero always creates his own villains. There's a reason that usually the best player in the world is unseated by someone who comes up of the next generation, who watches them, was partly inspired by them. I mean, all these guys are inspired by Magnus, but eventually they're the one who takes you down because they not only probably grew because they learned from you, but ultimately they're not as afraid of you because they didn't grow up watching you dominate. They don't have any any issues there. So I think there's a reason it happens the way it does. And I'm actually not that surprised by their trash talk because...
Oof, I know something I don't.
Yeah, I've also seen it, so yeah.
Wow, it sounds like the story of when your idols become your rivals. And right now, Abdusattorov in a bit of a think after Magnus's last move, developing the knight, and moves the bishop twice, creating a threat of his own.
Yeah, so interesting. He's lost a move. He's lost a tempo here, Abdusattorov, by moving his bishop twice in a row, but he has lured the black knight to d7. Danny was highlighting the black knight wanted a more active square. He wanted to come out to c6 to put pressure on white center. But he's saying, OK, I'm happy to take that hit, that tempo loss, but your knight is inferior to where it should be standing. Interesting move, and now he's forcing Magnus to react. Do we think Magnus is just going to shuffle, just defend this e7 pawn with his rook? It's a bit of a slow turn, this last couple of moves. I've got to admit, this bishop maneuver is slightly mysterious, to me at least.
Yeah, I mean, it does make Magnus do something. I'd be a little bit worried if I was white here, because white's just sort of playing normal-looking moves, but black's plan seems a bit more concrete, right? And I think you've pointed out already, black's just going to target white's double pawns. It's very simple. You're going to attack them with your knight, attack them with your bishop, and if white doesn't do anything, you're going to be in trouble. So white has to come up with a plan, and it does seem like there's maybe a slight drift there with the last couple of moves. I don't really know if white's found that plan yet.
I love what David highlighted, that the purpose of the tempo loss was to kind of put the knight on an awkward square, and then when it's not on c6, where it would have guarded the e7 pawn, now I go to g5, where I can target it. And maybe if I force your rook to e8, that's a position where the rook is later awkward. But I expect Magnus to play rook e8, and I will say that just from a practical perspective, this type of game where the players are uncomfortable with the structure, it's awkward, and they're really, I mean, how many moves are we in here, right? We're 10 moves in, and they've really used a lot of time. I feel like this is what Magnus wanted, right? And you referenced the Tal quote yesterday, Tanya, right? Take your opponent into the dark woods. I think that not only because of what we saw Nodirbek do against Aronian, where some prep got wild and Nodirbek was super dangerous, I think that just because of Magnus's approach to younger players, this is what he wants to do as far as getting the game off the well-traveled path.
And he is getting a game, but also on the clock. Both are level. So who would you describe this as favoring the opening outcome? Who's happier here out of the opening?
I would say both sides are happy. There we go. Magnus played the move we predicted, just keeping everything defended. I think Abdusattorov is happy because it's imbalanced and he doesn't want a slow grind where Magnus's kind of superior experience, and we saw the aim chess stats, Magnus's endgame skills might come to the fore. Here it's in the middle game. Piece trades are unlikely in the next few moves. So I think Abdusattorov has some reason to be happy. Magnus, he's happy because he's survived the opening. Objectively, he's fine, and he'll still believe long-term he can profit from white's slightly compromised structure. So I think pros and cons right now and the next few moves will be critical in this middle game fight.
And Danny, your idea coming up on the board, Magnus targeting those double pawns in a different way, but same concept. And he could potentially even be looking at offering a queen trade. David, endings, who does that favor in this kind of a setup?
I'm going to say Magnus. I just think long-term, if the queens disappear, white's pawns look weak. Just having this extended center looks nice and pretty while it's the middle game. But yeah, the more pieces disappear, the more responsibility there'll be for white and more weaknesses potentially. And yeah, if Magnus can trade on his terms, then great. Abdusattorov will be looking for ways to ensure that doesn't happen. Or if it does, that it will be on white's terms.
Completely agree with the last points you made. I completely disagree with the first one you made about Nodirbek being happy here. I think that Magnus is the happy one here. And I think that Magnus played knight b6 quickly. I expect that, again, like it's equal, and these guys are both super strong grandmasters, but I think Magnus is objectively very happy here. Here comes bishop b7. Here comes a traditional Nimzo-style maneuver and assault to the queenside pawns, and I think Nodirbek's clock is only going to keep ticking here for a little bit.
It's worrying how much I agree with you, Danny.
Don't do that.
Get a room, guys.
Really worrying. I mean,
Look, they put us on camera together.
I know. Hi, everyone. And but it is. I mean, I agree. I mean, I think Magnus, if he's going to play this opening, he's got what he wanted, right? And he's got some weaknesses to attack. He's kept the piece on the board. There's, you know, it's going the kind of way he does. And I was just looking at Magnus's chairs in the background. I was just like thinking to myself, my brain kind of like drifts off occasionally, and I was thinking like, how could we improve his bedroom? And I was thinking, could we get, like, you know, because Magnus said yesterday he's got those chairs for people like David to come along and stream. So I was thinking, could we get like maybe some kind of doll, you know, mannequin made with David's face on it? Just put it in the background while he's streaming. Am I just being really weird?
No, I have fatheads in my office laying around. I got Magnus over there and Fabio over there. I get a fatheaded David. I got to get that. I'll put you and Magnus together.
Can we do that?
Please
And
do,
just
Danny.
put Magnus in the background, maybe someone else there, just to make him feel like he's, you know, that social character he really is, you know.
And we've seen some mannequins in David's crib previously in the Champions Chess season. That video will
Sorry,
not
say
be
that again.
remembered.
What?
I didn't know
you've
that.
seen some-
What is that about?
Fake news. Didn't happen.
You've seen some mannequins in David's
That's all
house.
I'm going to say.
Really?
It's all on the internet.
Are you sure they're mannequins? They're not life-size?
Don't say it, Simon. Back to the position.
Poor David's got to defend himself at
There's
least.
too much out there on the internet.
Okay, but
I need to
I'm
bury.
just pointing out, Nodirbek continues to think. I think that this is uncomfortable for the young guy, and I do want to share a comment because Magnus said on Osklid's podcast, working super hard in the back. Shout out to you, Osklid, that while everyone knows he kind of dubbed Ali Reza as the next best talent of all of them, but he did specifically call out Abdusattorov as a guy that he's taken a note of and seen that he's always in the gym working out, and he's got his eye on him as a fighter. So anyway, but like I said, when I accidentally poked the bear yesterday, I had a feel. I said it last night. I said I have a feeling. I told you I have a feeling Magnus is going to show up here, like wanting to remind everybody that may not be as good as he once was, but he's as good once as he ever was. And I think Magnus wants to win this match.
Yeah.
Yeah, I must admit, I was watching Magnus stream Title Tuesday when he won, and afterwards he was still streaming, and I thought, okay, let's slide in with a sneaky challenge. I challenged him, and on stream he literally rejected me. He said, nah, I need to go home and sleep. We've got a big match tomorrow. So that shows how much he wants to win today.
Wow. Or he's just terrified of playing you.
I mean,
because you might have crushed him, and then you've done it before.
Magnus wants it. Magnus wants to win this one, and I think, Danny, you're absolutely right. You might have poked him a little bit there with the World Rapid Champion situation. And look at that. Nodirbek Abdusattorov offers a queen trade. If Magnus accepts it, that would mean his pawn structure improves. But Magnus, I don't know if you caught his expression. Queen b5 on the board, and he winced a little bit. He was surprised by this move.
No, he did, and it was a wince of kind of like a Hikaru number 7. Like, I don't think so, buddy. He's like, it was a wince of I don't believe it, and whether that means David he can take c3 or not, you're the super
Rook
grandmaster.
is hanging, Danny.
there's a hanging rook on e8. So
Oh, okay. I wasn't even paying attention to that. Why was he wincing then? Is it?
maybe he just didn't expect it. I think Magnus was dreaming of ways that he could trade queens, and then he's saying, okay, you go for this on your terms. How dare you? And either you have, I mean, there's two moves that I can see. Either you have to trade off, and like Tanya says, suddenly white has better pawn structure, connected pawns, or maybe you can be a bit sneaky and keep the queens on like this. X-ray vision, protect your rook. I'm just borrowing an idea you mentioned earlier, Danny, trading queens.
That's a nice move, though. Queen a4.
And it does come at the cost of some calculation. You have to wonder what happens if white captures a pawn and maybe grabs on c5. But as far as I can tell, you might be able to take this pawn. You might be able to take this pawn. It gets a bit spicy. gets hot here, but I like black's compensation, even if you're down a pawn, because long-term, these will simply fall off the board. They're too weak. So knowing Magnus, I think that he wants to keep the queens on, and he's paused, which means he does see options. He doesn't go for the automatic, but commentator's curse, he does trade off. He might have seen something here to do with the fact that white's pawn, at least temporarily on b5, is a bit weak. Okay, interesting decision.
Go ahead, Simon.
No, I mean, this is the move I think he had lined up, right? I mean, this is... I think he should play this before white can put a pawn on that square. And it kind of looks like some of white's pawns are still a little bit weak. White doesn't have those double pawns anymore, but, you know, there's still targets over there, right? So.
I was going to say that because even though I think we objectively looked at queen takes b5, like, all right, that fixes pawns, or that's the quick thought. Knight a4 proves that they're maybe they look better, but they're not totally fixed yet. And I'm going to keep them separated with knight a4. And even a6 is a possible move now, right? Because when you force him to take, the a2 pawn comes under fire. And I like that the computer likes it, because a6 is a way to expose that the rook had to leave the a1 square in order to guard c3. So knight a4, okay, bishop e6 next, now we see it. But watch out for this a6 move coming, because both the bishop and the rook would be lined up on that file, hitting the a-pawn.
Yeah, weaknesses in white's camp.
I just feel every time Magnus plays and the queens are off the board, it's time to...
Just resign. It is. I mean, whenever Magnus gets them off and he gets these like little, he just finds these little nibbles, doesn't he? He's like, you know, just like, I don't know what that was again, but like, he's like nibble away like a little, like, you know, I was thinking like, you know, little rabbit at your ankle, you know, annoying you. He's like that, and it's like, get off, you little rabbit, and it's like, before you know it, the rabbit's eating you. What's happened, you know? This is, I don't know. It's been a long day, Danny, and that's what Magnus does. He nibbles, and yeah, I agree, Tanya. When the queens are off, it is quite an uncomfortable situation. And, certainly, Magnus is better here, right? I mean, he's got targets to hit. Someone else, help me out, please.
As weird as that was, I think it was actually the perfect description of what it's like playing an endgame against Magnus.
That's right. He's a nibbler.
He's a nibbler.
I've been watching too much Monty Python or something.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah. I was thinking of the rabbits in Monty Python, definitely.
And meanwhile, yeah, awkward move there from Abdusattorov. He puts his rook on c2, defends his weak a2 pawn, but suddenly I'm thinking about those aim chess stats. Magnus' endgame accuracy was, what, almost 80%, finding the best move so often here, and yeah, just looks like awkward pressure. There's tactics in the air. a6, Danny, I'm loving it. Just strategically really desirable to activate that black rook on a8. Lots of choice.
Time edge too, so, and here he goes. He plays it.
Great call. a6 on the board. And trying to create more weaknesses in white's pawn structure. That would be a bad idea to open up the A-line. So he does fall back with the bishop. And now perhaps black has to avoid trading on b5, giving this tempo to white.
Yeah, if you, again, trade on your opponent's terms, then you might regret it. For example, here, there would be an awkward hit on the black rook. When you move the black rook, then you might just lose this pawn. Still some calculation to be done here, but instead, Magnus doesn't want to calculate at all. He plays a really nice move first. He plays h6, kicking away this bishop from the attack of this pawn. And when it retreats, maybe now, Tanya, is the time. Now that there's no pressure on e7 to take, and just park your rook on c8. All of black's pieces are kind of peering now down towards these weaknesses. Kind of, you can sense the X-ray, the pressure on this c-pawn, and it's just a bit awkward.
I love what you're highlighting, and this position really shows why black is in control here, because shout out to our guy Robert Hess, who always loves highlighting pawn tension, because usually you can evaluate, again, who's better based on who the breaks would favor, and black gets to build up and take at the right time. Like maybe right now is pinned, but if you back up and point out that nothing good could happen for white. If white pushes the d-pawn, you open up the dark square bishop, right? If you take on c5, the knight will capture and you open up the rook, right? And in all of these, you could have taken c3 even too, but I guess we're proving the point that usually we can evaluate captures as to whether they're good or not based on, does this capture give me more options or my opponent? Every pawn move for white gives black more options, which is a really tough spot to be, because your opponent gets to kind of build the water against the dam, right? And eventually it breaks. And it's hard to find moves here for Abdusattorov that don't make the position a little worse.
And he's forced to put his two rooks on really passive squares, and still no way to get out of this awkward tension for white. It looks like Magnus, if he can, will try to just slowly improve the position. You can already start, for example, kicking away this bishop from this active post on b5. And Yeah, it feels like one-way traffic right now. But Abdusattorov, he's covered all the holes, so we should praise him for defending so far and still level on the clock.
I think it's a sign of great players that you don't always know where one side's gone wrong, right? I mean, Magnus has suddenly got a good position, but where did he get that good position from, right? I mean, what did actually White do wrong in this game? And it's not really that clear, you know. He didn't do any bad moves. He didn't do any blunders. He didn't do any positionally big bad moves. So it's like, yeah, that's again a sign of real class. And I really like this last move because this is something you see in the Grunfeld a lot. And I think White had to play this pawn move because otherwise the bishop was going to slide past that and gain a very nice square. So yeah, so this looks kind of forced, and there's just a lot of holes. That black knight has a lot of potential, and the black rook as well on the open file. So it's very tricky for White.
It's funny. I think the only move that Abdusattorov did wrong was the one you were telling him to avoid, which was doubling the pawns early on. I mean, after that, it's been just a slow, as you called him, Nibble Carlsen.
Nibble Carlsen.
Nibble the Rabbit Carlsen.
Yeah, we could perhaps say that that kind of loss of tempo where he was trying to be a bit clever, a bit sneaky, maybe bishop f4, then bishop g5. Actually, it helped the black knight. Black's knight turned out to be on a great great circuit there. But yeah, can he hold this? This is what Magnus would call anti-young player chess. Just queens off the board, no risk.
But your extra piece.
The extra piece, the 17th piece, is the clock. And right now, Magnus Carlsen, touching the 2.5-minute mark, offers another trade. And I like it because, you were mentioning the knight. The black knight has all these jumping squares. There's one piece in White's camp that actually defends those squares, and that is the white bishop. Magnus trying to get rid of that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important when you're playing any standard, when you get into the middle game, you just got to, exchanges are so important, and you just got to work out, if I exchange these two pieces, does it help me or does it help my opponent? And you've got to have reasons. You've got to be able to explain to yourself how it helps. And the idea of this is that the black knight gets more squares. It's as simple as that. White does have this open B file, though. I mean, we're saying a lot about how Magnus is playing fantastically and he's doing so well. It's certainly not over yet. With that last move, White's trying to gain some counterplay on the B file, but it is just like, you know, going really in Magnus's way so far, I think, this game.
Will he grind this one down? Do you think he'll be able to, given the clock situation, with the slight edge, but is it enough?
I think so, because like everyone else, I suffer from Magnus bias-itis. It's an affliction, and Magnus bias tells me he will, and his accuracy in the endgame has earned that bias. But I do love how Nodirbek has played these last few moves. Really tenacious defense here. Rook to b1 is a nice chance. Again, if that light square bishop falls, you pointed out, Tanya, c4 becomes available, even a4. So I think it's tough. And you can't double rooks because the bishop is going to grab c3. So I'm still struggling to see the best moves here for Nodirbek. But okay, I mean, the clock. I love that this is becoming a mutual time scramble if I'm an Abdusattorov fan. Right, let's take this thing and do a scramble and take my chances at the king there.
Yeah, until you remember that Magnus is great at blitz as well.
Darn it. Darn it. He's just good at everything. Schmarn it.
Yeah. We're talking about a guy who doesn't let that get into his head. I'm going to predict a draw in this one. I think Abdusattorov will be able to hold this.
Are we going double or nothing on our good night drink situation, or
is that 6 glasses of water?
Well, I'm just I'm being PG here for the kids because the water is the only thing you can drink, and that's what you should drink. No more soda.
Stay hydrated.
Put the soda away, kids. Drink water.
Yeah, and right now Abdusattorov, okay, he's tanked there, but drops his knight back to d2. Quick trade. Magnus retreats.
Look at the speed.
Yeah, speeding up now. I mean, yeah, you've got to change pace, haven't you, as well? That's another sign of what the top players do. You know, when you're getting shorter time, you just got to, like, hang on a minute, right, I'll just move up the dial, put it into speedy mode, and Magnus is doing that. I mean, his knights hasn't found a great square on the queen side, the black knight, but his pawn structure is so solid, and that's another problem that White has. Look at White's pawn on the left-hand side on a2. That pawn on a2 is a straggler. It doesn't have a brother next to it that can defend it. It's all on its own. It's Billy no mates, or Ari no mates over there. It hasn't got any friends to look after it, and Black can just line up against it, right? The other rook could come over, and this is another issue. Just little positional things that White has to worry about here. No weaknesses at all for Black here. Maybe b7 slight weakness, but not a major problem, right?
And you know what Magnus wants to do eventually when he's all lined up, once the black rook lands on a4, he's going to switch his attentions to the other flank. It's that theory of two weaknesses, two targets. You kind of focus all your opponent's energy on one side and then you switch suddenly. And Magnus has pawn breaks. He can play moves like e6 or f5 at the right moment and start chipping away there. Abdusattorov is going to have to be so accurate. And that 17th piece,
Well,
Yeah.
I was going to say, Abdusattorov is going to be accurate. He's going to have to
That's
be
20
accurate quickly.
seconds for
He's got
him.
20 seconds.
Make a move. And there's still big decisions to be taken in this game. This is just getting started. And you mentioned the rook moving forward, creating more pawn moves. And now the doubling up is about to happen.
I was going to say, and that was a huge moment there because Magnus induces c4. Who does it take the square from? The knight, which allows you to play b6 because there's no more knight c4 targeting b6. So the technique there, phenomenal, right? Rook a4 first, induce c4, and then slide the rook over with b6.
That's a great point,
great
because
stuff.
so many of us would just push the pawn and double up already, but you actually take away a key square from your opponent. And right now, it feels as if Abdusattorov is hanging by a thread.
Yep.
Just keeping things defended, but it feels like one more attack, and David, it will fall apart. Where will it come from?
wow, Magnus argues it's going to fall apart on the c4 square. He's giving up his own b-pawn in order to get some more juicy targets. And I thought he was going to slow play it. White's pieces were utterly stuck, utterly paralyzed, the white rooks, knights, but he's trying to cash in now.
Oh, 7.
Oh, he's got...
What's going on? He needs to make a move.
3,
Yeah.
2, oh, he moves.
And he goes passive,
But a3
defending
falls.
it. And now, yeah, I mean,
That's a free pawn.
it's a free... Well, there's
b6 is hanging,
isn't there?
so maybe Magnus will slow play it, just defend his own weakness on b6. The threats persist. I don't see how
If he does that,
Abdusattorov's gonna hold.
f4 might. You have to be careful not to miss your chance. And I think Magnus is so good at not just smelling blood in the water, but having that sense, right, for the moment where you can't keep building. Because if you defend the pawn, does white get f4? I'm happy to part ways maybe with the dark square bishop as long as I hold. So I think that's what Magnus is calculating right now, and he'll be the one to tell. Okay, he allows it. So the question is,
I think tactically it was working. I think
tactically it
f4
worked
might have-
out.
Yeah.
And now maybe black is just going to go pawn up. I mean, this kind of pawn structure, is so important to know your pawn structures at home. You see this structure in the Benko and the Benoni opening, and I think it is very well known that as soon as the queens come off, white is so exposed, those pawns, and black's pawns are really compact, and these kind of middle game endings are nearly always losing for white. So know your pawn structures. You know, if you're playing any opening, you've got to know what you're doing in the later stages of the game, not just in the opening. And okay, this is a very sensible movie. I mean, he's not rushing. Maybe there was something a bit more dynamic, but he's taking his time. And look
The
at
knight
that.
jumps back. That's beautiful.
a beautiful little game of tickle.
Oh,
you know?
and now maybe just knight. Oh, hello.
Take c4,
Oh, it's just-
f4 was too late, and e4 is going to fall, and with it,
It's just too much.
the house is coming down, I think.
10 seconds, and it doesn't even matter. You could have an hour on your clock against Magnus in this position. Magnus will still perhaps take it.
Yep.
Do you think this is still a draw, Tanya? Oh,
It's
okay.
I think
We're
it's
not
going to be
gonna
6
remind her of
glasses
that.
of water.
Let's cash in later.
6 glasses of water.
We talked about 1 weak pawn, suddenly 3 dropped off in one go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how you do it, right? You strangle the position there. A boa constrictor is his style sometimes, right?
This is how Magnus burst onto the scene, just known as an endgame grade 8.
This type of game.
Yeah.
Like I said, you know.
I think it is really like the timing is so important. I mean, this is something that Bobby Fischer was famous for, timing things so well. And we saw that Lev, you know, his timing wasn't right today. He didn't play G5. He didn't get that move in. On the other hand, Magnus just picking the time to make his breaks. And it's a really hard skill to learn that one, when to sort of change gear in a game of chess. But Magnus is one of the best in the world at that, the best in the world.
And I'm still thinking about what you said earlier, Sai, that it's so hard to really understand where it went so wrong for Nodirbek. The move that we were pointing out, moving the bishop twice, that one small inaccuracy has cost him the game. Magnus has played flawlessly out of the opening. And just impeccable timing with picking up the pawn, taking away your opponent's counterplay. This is the Magnus golden touch in endgames.
Great. I feel like that comment from chat must be sarcasm or something, because Nodirbek did not get a good position at the opening in this particular game. Yeah, in fact, I agree with you, Tanya. It's been Magnus. The little things done right in the beginning, he's going to win with black in the first game of a 4-game match, just like he did against Fabiano Caruana yesterday. We'll see if Nodirbek can strike back, unlike Fabiano.
It's under 10 seconds now, so they're very calm,
not,
these guys.
You're
aren't
right.
they?
It's not over, but I think it's.
4 seconds for Nodirbek.
Ooh, he's
Make a
Move, town, population you.
Oh, did
Okay.
he? Made it.
made it with less than 1 second on the clock, I think. And
But another pawn falls.
Oh, very nice. Forces the rooks off.
oh,
Get out of here. Get out of here.
It's just too.
Too good.
Yep.
Here comes C4. It's explosive.
It's just the little touches, right? That rook exchange
And
was just
that's
brilliant.
it.
It resigns
brilliant.
before the dynamite.
Over. Magnus Carlsen shows who's boss with the black pieces, wins round 1 in that endgame. And look at him. He's on the screen. This one matters to him a lot. He wants to win this match against Nodirbek, the new generation, the frontrunner of the new wave of chess players. David, tell us where